Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So today I am back to do my 2017 favourites, which is the follow-up to my previous videos in this series talking about my pre-Booktube favourite books of the year. I started Booktube in 2020, so I have done favourites videos for all of those years following, but I have been keeping a track of my favourite books of the year since 2014, and because I am planning on starting a favourites project, going over all of the books that I've previously thought were my favourites of all time, so that I can one day do a definitive "these are my all-time favourite books" video. I thought that this would be a good little exercise and just a really good reminder of all those previous bookish loves of mine. As I say, I have done videos for 2014, 2015 and 2016, and now we are on to do the 2017 favourites. In 2017 I read 57 books, which is much better than I was doing in 2016, but I was definitely not quite in my stride of reading as I would be in later years. It was also a bit of a weird year. This was my first full year out of university, at least for the first time, and it was a bit of a weird year combining working part-time with applying to loads of jobs in publishing and not hearing back from any of them. I did have a few work experience placements during this time, 2 of which were actually in publishing companies, so it wasn't a completely hopeless year. But yeah, a bit of an odd one, and one where, once again, like at uni, I would feel guilty if I was spending time reading when I could have been applying for jobs. But then I was also balancing that thought with, well, you also do need to relax. You're not going to do any better at your job applications if you're completely frazzled. So yeah, bit of a weird year, this one. Instead of the top 10, I do have a top 9, and this list, compared to other years, isn't actually in order of my preference for the books, but just in order of when I read them, and so that will be the order that I go in. The first favourite book that I ended up reading in 2017, according to this list, was Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates, which might potentially be the first time that a non-fiction book has cropped up on any of these lists. I was definitely starting to read a lot more non-fiction in this year, particularly after doing work experience at Icon Books, who are an entirely non-fiction company, and surprise surprise, I now work for an entirely non-fiction publisher. You've probably seen the Everyday Sexism project on Twitter, though it doesn't seem to be quite as prominent now, at least as it was in 2017, where people would submit their experiences, both from tiny little microaggressions all the way up to full-on assaults that are all based in sexism. And this book is basically a big compilation of all of these different experiences that have been submitted to Laura Bates through this project of Everyday Sexism. And this is probably a book that Laura Bates could end up republishing in various editions with all of the different experiences that have come in since 2017. It's definitely one of those books that I think should be on everybody's to-read list, especially if you are someone who's never really considered how pernicious and how constant sexism can be. I don't know if this would make a favourite books of all time, but like I say, I think it's one that people should read. The next book on this list is A Little Life by Hanya Yanigihara, which I know is a very controversial, quite Marmite book on YouTube. I obviously happen to fall in the camp of people who really love this book. I did find this really moving, really poignant. Absolutely devastating, yes. I don't think I cried though. I see a lot of videos of people crying while reading this book, and that didn't quite happen for me, though it did make me emotional. I don't think this would end up in a favourite books of all time video, but it is one that I think is really good and does stand up to all of the hype, though I do admit it's not for everybody. There is a variety of opinion on this book on Booktube, and I do think it's warranted. I think it's one that we're always going to be having conversations about. I happen to find it really powerful and moving, but it's not going to be for everybody, and that's perfectly fine. Third book on this list is When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, affectionately known to me as the book that made me cry on the tube. This is Paul Kalanithi's memoir, having been a brain surgeon who ended up finding himself on the other side of the operating table, finding out that he himself had cancer, and this memoir being his way of reconciling himself with that. It's also really devastating because it is dedicated to his daughter, who he isn't going to have the chance to see grow up. And yeah, made me sad. Made me very sad. As I say, I was reading this on the tube from, I think it was King's Cross to Osterley, because I was actually doing work experience at Sky. And yeah, I don't think all of those people on the Piccadilly line were necessarily expecting to see a fully grown woman crying at her book. But yeah, this one got me. It got me. I haven't read this one since, but I do feel like if we are talking favourite memoirs, this is definitely right up there, along with another book that is on this list. Book number 4 is actually 2 books, so I guess this technically is a top 10, but both of these books are sharing a spot because they are written by the same author. This author was definitely having a moment in 2017, and those books are The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck, as well as Get Your Shit Together by Sarah Knight. I actually really enjoyed reading this while the hype of it was happening. Doesn't always happen for me. I'm usually quite late to hype books, but once again, it's one that I remember reading whilst doing work experience in London and seeing multiple people on the tube also reading these books. And yeah, I enjoy Sarah Knight. I think she's very fun as a writer. Kind of has this tone of this like very no nonsense aunt who's wanting to give you advice but not not wanting to be overly flowery, just wanting to give advice that is very real and grounded and also gives you a bit of a shake up. The first book, of which the title is definitely parodying Marie Kondo's, but instead of physical decluttering, this book is definitely much more about like mental decluttering. I feel like this book has gotten a reputation for being very much because it's not giving a fuck. That means not caring about anybody. But I think what this book is much more about is you do not have to give 100% of yourself to everything at all times. You are allowed to go easy on yourself. You are allowed to say no to things if you don't want to do them. You shouldn't feel obligated to everybody and everything. And kind of working out in your mind personal policies that you can put in place so that when people do ask you to do something that goes against your values or you just don't have time for, you can feel kind of mentally prepared to give that no if you need to. And I don't think that that is necessarily a bad thing. Get Your Shit Together is much more about organisation, and it's probably a book that I need to come back to because my life and my brain feel very disorganised right now. There's actually a TED talk that Sarah Knight did like when this book first came out, and I actually really recommend giving it a watch, giving it a listen, just to see if Sarah Knight's style, whether her tone really gels with you. I feel like you'd be able to get a good sense from that TED talk whether it would or wouldn't. I enjoy these. I think they're fun. I haven't read every book in the series, but eventually maybe one day. Book number 5 is Goodbye Things by Fumio Sasaki, yet another minimalist book. And actually saying that, I also have the Curated Closet by Anuschka Rees. Goodbye Things is obviously much more generally about getting rid of your things, whereas the Curated Closet is much more focused on your wardrobe, curating a wardrobe that is perfect for you. Whether or not you get on with either of these books is very much to your own taste. I remember finding them really, really helpful. It's not something that I absolutely dedicate my life to, but I feel like I got some good little lessons out of them. And I feel like they're both books that I would want to hold on to and come back to if my life ever feels like it's very overwhelming again, if I feel like I'm drowning in stuff. I think books like this are just very good for reminding you to be a bit more intentional with your purchases, which I think everybody needs a reminder of from time to time. Book number 7 on this list is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, a book that I am still really cross got robbed of the Women's Prize for Fiction. This book is set in 1980s Nigeria, following the main character of Yejide and her kind of mental unravelling as, following years being married very happily to her husband, she's not been able to have a child, and therefore his family pressure him to take a second wife so that he can have a child, and just how this completely destabilizes their relationship. Like I say, this is one that I am still very cross about not winning the Women's Prize for Fiction, so I think that goes to show how much I enjoyed it. It's not one that I would say is an absolute favourite of all time, but I loved the writing in this. I felt very emotionally connected to the characters. It's one that I would very readily recommend to people. And just remind me that this author does have a new book out, and I haven't picked it up yet, though I am still working on my TBR, so maybe that's one for when it comes out in paperback. Book number 8 on this list is another memoir, and it is Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal by Jeanette Winterson. This is one that I actually picked up at a Penguin work experience event. I think with the realisation in 2017 of how Southern dominated the publishing industry is, Penguin decided to have this initiative where they would do like little work experience taster days, little industry events to different cities up north, and I ended up getting on the course that was in Newcastle. So yeah, I just had a day in Newcastle, getting to talk CVs, getting to talk interviews with people who were in the industry, and at the end of the event they ended up giving a bunch of Penguin books out for free, and this is the one that I collected. This is Jeanette Winterson's memoir, detailing her early life, particularly realising that she was in fact a lesbian, and how as a result she was isolated and shunned by her Pentecostal Christian parents. If you've read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson, you'll probably be very familiar with this story, and I would actually say of the two of them, as famous as Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit is and how great it is, I actually did prefer reading her memoir. I just found it incredibly moving, incredibly sad in places, but also there was this bit of hope. I think maybe there was a bit of added perspective with 26 years removed from Oranges to Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, where Jeanette could reflect a bit more, her having even more time to process what happened, seeing the reception to Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, and how that impacted on her relationships with her family. I would say if you've only ever read Jeanette Winterson's fiction, definitely give this a go. And even if you don't know anything about Jeanette Winterson, I still feel like you could get a lot out of this. And then the final book on this list is probably the most important one. If you know me well, you knew that eventually this book would have to make it onto one of these lists. And I can feel Kieran from KD Books squirming in his seat, because in fact 2017 was the year that I first read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I think this and Anna Karenina were the two books that I had had on my TBR the longest in 2017. I managed to read Anna Karenina within like 2 or 3 weeks, and like emboldened and empowered by this, I decided that I will finally get to Les Mis. And it was a much speedier process than you might imagine, as opposed to in 2021 where me and Kieran read this over the span of 3 months. In 2017 I went even harder, and I ended up reading Les Mis within the space of a month, which when you break it down is like 50 pages a day. I don't know how I did this, but it was totally worth it. And I knew the second that I finished it that one day I would have to go back and reread it, because I felt just completely bereft. Even having spent like 50 pages a day for a month reading about Jean Valjean and Cosette and Fantine and Javert and all these characters that I knew that I loved, I just couldn't believe it was over. Like, I mean, if you've been on this channel for any length of time, you know how I feel about Les Mis. You know that this is a favourite book of all time. I don't know where it would land in a top 10, but it would definitely be in the top 10. I just love it so much. I can't talk about it enough. I already have talked about it probably for way longer than any sane person actually should. Links to that playlist down below. But I love Les Mis. I will never be over it. I will never stop talking about it. It just has my heart. November 2017, Les Mis just had me in a vice grip, and the book has not let go, just like the musical didn't let go. And you know what? I think I'm better for it. But there we go. Those are all of the books that were on my 2017 favourites. Do let me know what you were reading in 2017, and do you have any recommendations for me? I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.